Hi, my name is Will Myers. I'm from Group 6. We were doing the bad news messages and current business perceptions analyzed through the lens of Enron. And so we conducted a private interview with an ex-Enron general manager, Jim Fuja, about his time at Enron and if it had made him more conscientious of those in management for the future. And he responded with conscientious is one word, suspicious is more appropriate. I'm certainly more cynical now about management prerogatives than I ever was before Enron. I think this kind of says a lot because he worked firsthand and was at a high position, and he still was very suspicious of those above him. So maintaining credibility. The delivery of bad news can really damage relationships if not done properly. In Enron's case, they did not do this properly because they did not choose to deliver any bad news messages at all. And this really caused a growth in societal distrust of businesses. The delivery can highlight credibility within an organization by demonstrating a commitment to honesty and transparency. So there actually can be good that can come out of bad news messages by showing how honest and transparent and want to move forward. An effective bad news messages really instills a feeling of confidence, caring, and good character, while the lack of any message at all leads to a large stain on your character when the bad news festers and inevitably is revealed. So maintaining credibility in the context of Enron. Enron's lack of transparency and the lack of communication with the public essentially destroyed Enron's credibility and the public's trust in large companies. Enron often opted not to deliver difficult messages at all as they looked bad for the company in short term. The long-term effects of this was the public lost complete trust in their credibility and competence of Enron to be transparent in their business dealings. In a report by the Wall Street Journal, Enron was urged to report their differences in assets and liabilities, but they did not disclose such information because it would reflect poorly on the company's financials. This is just another example of how Enron was, they were favoring short-term advantages over long-term and end up collapsing them all on itself. So to compare two big scandals in recent history, the BP oil spill and Enron's, everything that happened with Enron and how they handled it. BP oil spill is an excellent example of how to deliver bad news at a large corporate scale. While they did not handle the situation perfectly, they were able to remain as a business and retain some of the public trust. They did this ultimately by perfecting their bad news messages and being honest and transparent with their messaging. And they were looked to the future to see how they could fix the issue. No communication is always worse than delivering bad news, and this is the fundamental difference between how Enron and BP responded to their issues. BP chose to work and move forward and take the issue right on the head, whereas Enron did not and chose to hide it and didn't disclose its information, which ended up collapsing on itself.
Hello, I am Mitchell Seacott with Group 6, and I'm here to talk about communication channels and information gathering in the context of delivering bad news and Enron. Communication channels are best divided into two primary forms, being verbal, in-person communication, and written communication. Oral communications provide a more significant opportunity for feedback to get any discomforts out immediately. Written communications promote the fidelity of your message but can come off as impersonal. Factors to consider when choosing a channel include controllability of the news and the likelihood of a positive reception. Next slide. Communication channels with the context of Enron. Enron, as they say, is an excellent example of a bad example. Channels of communication, and especially communication itself, were something Enron chose to forego. As we know from our former interview with former general manager Jim Fuja, no communication channels were used besides when they were immediately fired one day after launch. He explained, The COO and EES jumped up on the trader desk. This was a standard practice for their meetings. He said something like, okay, this isn't your fault, and it isn't our fault, but effective immediately, you're all fired. Get out of the building in the next 30 minutes. The lack of thought in the context and timing of their information and the channels they have chosen to deliver it shows a lack of care on Enron's side. Next slide. Gathering information is an essential step in the delivering news process, since you need the info that you will be delivering. This is done primarily in a 3-step process, with the first step being determine your audience and how they will respond to the news. Secondly, you need to get a full grasp of the information being conveyed and understand it completely. Finally, we have develop your message. This is where the most effective means of delivery are selected so that the news is both empathetic and received while still being accurate. Next slide. Enron has an excellent track record about thinking how employees and the public would receive news of their fraudulent activities. However, their choice ultimately was to not deliver any information. When Enron did finally end up getting caught, however, they had so many loose ends that they were not prepared to deal with, since they had stopped at the first step of information gathering. If they had continued the process, they might have been able to save their stakeholders and reputation in the long run and been allowed to continue doing business, perhaps even to today, 20 years after their fall.
Thank you, Mitchell. I'm Luis Ramos, and I will be explaining the importance of breaking bad news to clients as it is a tricky situation, as said earlier. If this is not done properly, this can damage current and future businesses, as it will be the blueprint for future business or recommendations to others. This will demonstrate empathy and composure, helping maintain a trust despite bad news. So both direct and indirect bad messages should be delivered with a buffer to ease in with showing concern and explaining impacts while focusing on the future. With Enron being such a successful company with a clear visible future at the time, it came as a huge shocker to the public and especially shareholders that this empire was built on distrust. Enron's lack of communication made the situation shadier, as it seems as if they were trying to lie to get by in the head, destroying all trust rather than to admit to it. If Enron were to have delivered a well-composed, effective bad news message with their audiences, there would have been a chance to reconcile Enron's credibility and trust to move forward towards the future. Enron set a new precedent that businesses should successfully hide their wrongdoings from shareholders and the general public, raising a newfound concern about how transparent a business should be, creating the post-trust era that we are now in. When dealing with performance reviews, it is crucial to cut to the point and avoid any distractions from the point. The most efficient way to go through this process is avoiding sugarcoating and being direct to the point, despite attitudes or intentions, with clear, reasonable expectations to follow the review for a better performance for the future and strengthening this relationship despite any negative connotations brought by the review. As mentioned from the visit of the ex-Enron employee this semester, the top 5% and traders were the ones that brought in 7-figure checks. From reading the Lens for PR report, it is made clear that performance reviews were not highly valued within Enron. The deal makers who made Enron money through large contracts were often promoted to higher management positions over people with actual management experience. This demonstrated to the public how Enron valued the inflow of cash in business over the quality of work, as performance didn't mean bigger paychecks. This meant a decrease of an incentive to do good work over finding a way to bring money to Enron, making the practice unethical. So for Enron, it was money over people ideology. This led many employees to feel that corporate leadership only truly cared about those charged with executing the deals and making Enron produce a profit.
Thank you, Luis, for your PowerPoint
Today, I'm going to be concluding our presentation about reviewing bad news messages and reviewing the context of Enron's bad news. This is arguably the most important part next to how it is delivered, because it could make or break your relationship with your receiver. So when developing a bad news message, you must undergo a series of clarification, since this matter has to be handled well because it's a negative experience for your employee. You must proofread your message to make sure it's clear and concise. Sharing with a colleague to get better feedback if necessary is not a bad idea, because you don't want to be too harsh, but you also do want to get your point across. When coming together with a bad news message, you should also apply the FAIR test along the way of development. Reviewing bad news messages in context of Enron. Enron's downfall was not caused by their competence and ability to craft and deliver bad news, but it was their lack of delivering any information at all. This lack of communication caused Enron's problems to not be addressed and fester. So when everything came crashing down, all the bad news Enron tried to hide completely blew up in their face, and they didn't know how to handle it since they already did not communicate well among the workplace. Enron's unprecedented lack of transparency when dealing with the issue caused the general public to perceive the business in an untrustworthy manner. And lastly, the lasting effect of Enron's inability to deliver bad news. Enron's inability to disclose information about their wrongdoings ultimately caused a shift in society and changed how the public perceived businesses. This unprecedented lack of transparency by Enron was viewed negatively to the general public, causing the lasting ripple effect of untrust that can still be felt today. So thanks to Enron and their lack of communication, we now view the business place as untrustworthy and kind of negatively, as opposed to how we used to view it. So I want to give a quick thank you to my colleagues for helping with this presentation, and thank you guys for attending our PowerPoint presentation on bad news messages and current perceptions and the lie of Enron.